Introduce and then chat with Orit Kopel, who's going to talk about the project that she co-founded with Jimmy Wales, quite a fascinating new idea in the news world that you may obviously have heard of, or you wouldn't be here, called Wiki Tribune. I have a disclosure that I need to make before I get going, and that is I've been a friend of Jimmy Wales for a long time, and I'm also an investor in his private company, not this one, a different one. So that disclosure aside, I've been watching the progress of Wiki Tribune, and I'm fascinated by it and looking forward to hearing more about what's going on. And with that, Orit's going to show you a video and some information about the project and what they're doing. So over to you to start.
Yes, so I'm going to stand because I can't really present when I'm sitting.
Do you have a mic?
Do I need a mic?
We'll need a handheld mic for her.
So hi everyone, I'm Orit, as Dan presented me. So my presentation is going to be a little bit stretched. It's a tech thing, but as long as it's going to work, then we're fine. It's going to be a very short presentation of Wiki Tribune. I cut off half of my presentation because I want our main session to be a conversation with Dan about Wiki Tribune. So just a little bit about myself. I'm Orit Kopel. My background is actually in human rights law. I've been the CEO of the Jimmy Wales Foundation for the past 3 years, advocating for bloggers and social media users who get persecuted for speaking out online. So we've been campaigning for them in the past 3 years, and I was privileged to work with Jimmy Wales on Wiki Tribune in the past year, working on fixing the news. So I'm gonna start, that's Jimmy. Again, stretched, he's much skinnier in real life. So I'm gonna show you the video from our crowdfunding last year, just to give you a little bit of background about what we do. Hopefully it's gonna work. And again, it's stretched, but you're gonna get the idea.
The news is broken, but we figured out how to fix it. See, before the internet, we could only get our news from traditional news organizations. Editors, fact-checkers, and reporters were the gatekeepers of news, and we trusted them to tell the truth. We even paid for them to tell the truth. That's how much we respected the news. Then the news went online, and suddenly we wanted it all for free, and we wanted advertisers to pay for it. This is a problem, because ads are cheap.
So if you're here, you probably know why the news is broken and how. So I'm going to focus today on how we tend to fix the news. Don't panic, we are here to save the world. So what is Wiki Tribune? It's an inventive news initiative that brings together community of volunteers and hired professional journalists in an effort to create a collaborative news space, a high-quality news platform that is genuinely community controlled and has the backbone of professional journalists. So it's, first of all, is a wiki, so it means that everyone has access to edit everything as much as you have in Wikipedia. We start our fixing of the news by changing the business model. As Jimmy always says, I built my career based on a series of good ideas and bad business decisions. So we decided to launch with no ads and no paywall. We fully rely on a voluntary subscription model where people who believe in our vision and want to support high-quality journalism choose to pay monthly subscription to allow us to create these amazing projects. That means that if we don't have paywall, it means that everyone has full access to read everything on our website. And moreover, our community members are welcome to initiate, author, fact check, verify, and improve all the articles. You can go to every article right now on WikiTribune.com and edit everything on the website. We practically treat our journalists who are hired and work on a daily basis and our community of volunteers as equal. Everything that our young journalists can do, you can do as our community members. This is, again, a little bit stretched, but every article has this part of a talk page, just like you have. How many of you have ever edited an entry on Wikipedia? Yay, so all of you know that you can go to a talk page, discuss the entry, and change everything that you want. We have the same model in here. You can just flag biases and flag problems, but we encourage you to actually fix that yourself. The first question I always get is, what about the trolls? So don't worry, we have a way to regulate them. We don't intend in future to hire, like Facebook did, hire thousands of regulators to go through and block people and so on. We encourage to create a community that's going to self-regulate. We want to have admins and editors growing up from the community, have trusted community members to regulate both the content and the members. So if someone is corrupting deliberately an entry, we can ban them for a week and explain nicely what happened and if they can fix it. But everything is transparent, obviously, as Jimmy likes to say, and I'm vegetarian, so I don't like it, but he says that the sausage factory is transparent to everyone, so everyone can see and be integrated in the process of creating the news articles. So we have a hybrid model. I'm just being quick because I want to move to the side of discussing it with Dan. So we have the journalists and the community members. Each one has its own added value. Our journalists have better access to prominent people to get interviews. They have the professional experience to do that and to tell a story. But our unique part is obviously our community, which adds a lot of really important part in the process of creating news. They have the numbers, which is very important. If you have a traditional news website, every article is being reviewed by maybe one or two editors, but we are open for review for potentially hundreds of people going through and flagging every problem that we might have and fixing biases and fixing things that we might have skipped, or, we are all blind to our own biases. So the more variety of backgrounds we have from people on our community of volunteers, the better and more neutral our articles are going to be. That's our neutrality supervision there. But on the other hand, if we have a fire on Grenfell Tower in London, for instance, we can't tell one of our volunteers, go and cover the story. But we do want to be news websites. That's why we have our hired journalists, and we pay them to go and do the coverage on a timely basis. So they have the dedicated time, which is very important. That's very briefly. Those are our values that I'm very excited to discuss with Dan soon. Our main one is neutrality. Obviously, it's something that I feel that's really missing in news outlets these days. If I'm going to watch CNN or Fox News, I know more or less the kind of biases that I'm going to be exposed to. But I have this desire of just getting the journalism to communicate the information to me. I don't want them to feed me what to think. I want it to provide information. That's what we want to do in Wiki Tribune. Fact-based, unbiased journalism, and we're going to do it by being monitored by the community on a regular basis and having them correcting things. Transparency, we're going to have every article. For instance, if we have an interview with a person, we're not only going to tell the story of the interview, we want to provide the recording and the transcript of the entire interview, so our community members, I'm sure that most people won't want to sit down and listen to unedited 2 hours of an interview, but our community members might want to do that, and in that case, they'll be able to say, you know what, you quoted him saying that and that, but in that context, it might mean something else. And then they can fix it, and again, making it better. Reliability, everything is going to be obviously verified before publication, so we might not be the first. We don't have the resources to, fight the New York Times, but we are able to be very precisely very cautious about verifying everything before it's published. We might be slower than other publications, but we're going to be very high quality. We're going to provide very high quality journalism and verified facts, and that's the part of originality, of bringing a different angle to stories. To, everyone is covering more or less the same, news every day. We want to bring the unique angle, something else. We want people to read through the story and feel that they gain something, that they learn something about the world. We provided something else. It's the opposite of the clickbait headlines where you're tempted to click it, and then you're like, why did I waste the last 2 minutes of my life reading that? So we don't want to do that. We want people to read through and feel like they gained something, they learned something in the world, they read something they couldn't read anywhere else, and they want to support it. That's equality and diversity, which is personally very important for me as with my background in human rights, to bring the most extreme diversity to our community so they can help us bring stories from different angles, to remove all biases, to be gender equal, and bring, different stories from different places around the world, from different communities, not just the mainstreams that we see everywhere. I think that's very important. So all of that, hopefully, is going to bring back the lost trust. I believe that people lost trust in journalism, and the way to fix it is to close the gap between the journalists and the people. We want to trust them first, and I think that's the first step in order to allow them to trust us. If everything is transparent, they have access to everything, they're a part of the process, the readers. They don't have this fear from the media of what are they doing there in those newsrooms. No, everything is transparent. Sausage factory, they see everything, they know what we put in, they're a part of it, they can contribute, they can fix, they're a part, we're all together here in creating. Think of Wikipedia, it's the same thing but with news, and we do bring the professional backbone just to make sure everything is verified and correct. That was about a third of my general presentation, because I want to welcome Dan Gillmor back so we can discuss further our vision and our values. Thank you.
Yeah. We do want this to be the room involved, not just me asking questions, so we'll quickly get to you folks. I have a couple of things to start. How does, who decides what to cover? What are the topics? Is there a focus to the coverage, or is it just kind of random, anything that anyone wants to do?
Yeah, so currently we cover local and global events. We have our editor sitting here, Peter Bale. So I think it's mostly come from our editor, his professional background, deciding what's important to cover and what's more, and what's not. But we do listen to the community. Everything is community control. So if there is a demand from a community to cover certain stories, then we're gonna do that. And we constantly asking our community what they're interested in. We saw that there is an interest in a cryptocurrency, for instance, so now we're gonna investigate it further and cover it. We don't want to be the one delivering to the community. In our vision, the community is going to bring up stories. They're going to start them. They're going to activate our journalists. They're going to say, okay, we want that to be covered. Can you go and explore that? Can you check that for me? Can you do the investigation for us to check if that's, proper and so on?
So what have been the major topics of coverage at Wiki Tribune? What are there any areas that you focus on more than others?
Well, we cover current events more or less. We have some interviews. We don't have anything right now.
Okay.
We're working on.
So bringing the idea of wiki to journalism is interesting in a lot of ways, and I wanted to ask you, what are the, you talked a bit about it, but I'd really like to go a little deeper in what the advantage is for you, and also what may be problems that would be created by doing it that way. So start with, what are the advantages of using a wiki system, although it's not completely a wiki? Obviously, if editors are holding stuff before they publish, it's a little different. But talk about that.
So first of all, a wiki, the concept of wiki is that everyone has access to edit. It not necessarily says that it's published immediately.
Mm-hmm.
The German version of Wikipedia, for instance, they have everything approved first before publication.
Mm-hmm.
It's very cultural dependent. So it doesn't make it any less of a wiki. We are working on a platform to make it better, but it is a wiki. Everyone has access to everything. I think the wiki concept is that everyone can contribute in his own way, his or her own way. It means that you don't have to bring up a scoop in order to be part of Wiki Tribune. You don't need to bring the whole story. You can fix a typo. You can add, if your hobby is to take photographs, for instance, of insects. I don't know, and there is an article about insects. You can add your picture and make it better. You can just elaborate on certain things. If you have the sensitivity to grammar, you can fix grammar mistakes that we might have. If you're good in designing, you can help us design the stories to make it look better, and so on and so on. So each person can contribute in his own way. And again, it's very similar to Wikipedia. There are people in Wikipedia that everything they contributed was creating really nice charts, for instance, which is very complicated for every person. But there are people that know how to do it, and they made Wikipedia the way it is today. Hopefully, we're going to duplicate that to the Wiki Tribune part of things. But as much as there are a lot of things that are similar between Wikipedia and Wiki Tribune, it's different. So first of all, obviously Wikipedia is an encyclopedia and Wiki Tribune is a news website, so that's a very core difference that we have. Our articles are time limited, and while in Wikipedia, obviously it's going to stay there forever, hopefully, if it's a good entry. We don't cover only things with historical nature and importance. We cover news stories. So if there was, I don't know, a water break in London for 3 days, so that's obviously a news story, but it's not necessarily an encyclopedia entry. So it is going to be covered in Wiki Tribune. It's not going to be covered in Wikipedia. And one of the most fundamental differences also is the sources. So in Wikipedia, as those that raise their hands editing Wikipedia, you know that you have to have a source. Otherwise, it's not going to last. You have to have a reliable source to source to. But on Wiki Tribune, hopefully, because we have the professional journalists, we can be the source ourselves. We are producing news. We're producing the information. We're making the interviews. We send our journalists to cover things instead of relying only on, we do that as well, but not only on current resources. So there is this other stage of holding on before publications. We can't really publish everything immediately. We can if it's just typos, but if it's substantial addition to the stories, we need to make sure that it's fact-based and it's of high quality. You know, when you talked about it, I gave you the example of I was in a panel a few months ago, and there was someone that obviously really hated Wikipedia for some reason, and he kept on bringing up the story of someone editing, I don't even remember who it was, some prominent person. His entry was corrupted by adding a Teletubbies picture instead of his picture. So that's funny, and you can have a really funny screenshot that you can send around, but after 5 minutes it's going to be corrected by one of Wikipedia's admins, and it's going to be gone, and that's it. Nothing bad happened. But when it's a news website, you can't be so permissive to that kind of corruptions. You can't publish fake news, otherwise you're part of the problem. That's why we have this threshold of having everyone seeing everything, all the drafts, but before publications, we're gonna have some quality control to make sure that it holds to our standards.
As someone whose Wikipedia page has been out of date and wrong for about 5 years now, I kind of have this fondness for editorial process. But I also have a fondness, as you know, for the public being part of it. I have a question here. Wiki Tribune is a for-profit operation. Wikipedia is a not-for-profit operation. So a question that I think I'll ask, I think, and others would ask this: what is in it for the public to be participating, for the non-paid journalists? Why are they doing it? When their work is basically subsidizing other people who are being paid, and ultimately the founders of the company.
Well, you presented it the wrong way. The support by the public is helping us making good journalism. And I think there is a goodwill of a lot of people to support high-quality journalism. If you go to The Guardian right now, you read through an article at the bottom, they're going to ask you to support high-quality journalism, so you don't feel like you're supporting, I don't know, the founders. You're supporting high-quality journalism. We use the money to hire journalists. The contributions from the community are going to help us reduce the cost of our journalists' time. And people are willing to do that. People are fact-checking all the time. If you go to Reddit, you can see,
I asked that, it's the same question I ask anybody who is asking for the public to help them do things that they will ultimately profit from in any way. And this is not unique in any way in that category, but I'm interested in what the volunteers are, what they tell you about why they're doing it.
They're doing it because they want to, because it's fun. People are focusing on things that they like doing. We won't ask people to correct typos if they don't like doing that. We're not going to send people to take pictures if they don't like, doing photography. If you go to, I was starting to say that if you go to Reddit, you can see that they are doing fact-checking all the time for random things. I know on the Vegas shooting, if you remember, there were conspiracy claims right after that. There were 2 shooters. Remember that, right? And on Reddit, right in the same evening, they actually managed to prove that it's wrong. They brought a video of the place showing that the reflections that other people concluded is the second shooter is actually reflections that's been there a week before, and it's from a sign, a neon sign from the other side of the road, and they just debunked it. So, and no one paid them to do that. And you know what? No one paid Wikipedians to do the entire amazing encyclopedia, that the best encyclopedia in the world, for free for everyone. So people are enthusiastic in fact-checking. People are enthusiastic about creating better journalism. So everyone contributing their own way. Some people would choose to subscribe and help us maintain our project, and some people will be more inclined to, pull up their sleeves and just help us create that.
Is you said you talked about everything being Creative Commons. Does that apply to the software that people could,
Yes.
so people could create their own Wiki Tribune in their own community using your software if they wanted to?
Well, the software is currently not really completely done, but yes, everything is open source and everything can be used as long as it's sourced back to us. So yes, everything can be used.
Has anyone proposed doing that, taking your model and applying it at a local level as opposed to
We want to do that. So we're
lower-
discussing currently with a lot of different organizations about applying it in a local level for local journalism. We're great believers in local journalism. So we are in contact with the Knights Foundation, probably know that. And we think it can really work on the local level because people are striving to have their neighborhoods covered, their city hall. If you have a corruption in your city hall, I don't think currently that you have enough investigative journalism focusing on that. So we are very enthusiastic in applying Wiki Tribune on local level. I think people will be willing to take part in that and contribute to local journalism.
You talked about transparency, and I'm quite interested in what's going on with the transparency inside. Pretty much anybody who wants to, whether they are a contributor or not, right, can look under the covers and see everything that's going on. Talk about that a bit. Is there anything there that someone in this room could not look at in terms of the process?
Everything is transparent. Actually, you can go to the website and, get to Jimmy Wales' profile page, account page, and see all his personal contributions to the website, all his comments, everything going back. The history is all kept, so you can see all the history of every entry. Everything is transparent. All the discussions are on the top page of every entry. And we take it even further. As I said, if we have an interview, we want to add not only the transcript, but also the entire recording as much as we can. Of course, we take regard to the interviewee if he wants to remove some non-important parts of it, if he was mumbling or whatever. But we want to have everything available to our community so they can do a good job in making it better.
So the equivalent of the Wikipedia talk pages are also open for the...
Exactly.
Does all of the conversation about an article on Wiki Tribune, is every single bit of the conversation included in those talk pages, or are there kind of off on the side conversations that don't show up on
They should be.
the
We
site?
have a Slack channel that we discuss things, but Jimmy always said, bring it back to the website. We want everything to be transparent. So we want everything to be available for everyone to see and everyone to contribute and take part in.
So no one's using encrypted messaging to have side conversations?
Well, if someone is going to want to be a whistleblower, and so there are going to be some very extreme cases where we're going to say, okay, so as long as we can verify the source, we're going to publish it. But our ideal is to have everything available for everyone.
You're based in London, and the question on that, you answered for me because you and Jimmy live in London. So does that raise any risks for you, given that journalism is under attack in a lot of places, and London and the UK is known for bogus libel suits against journalists. Does that cause you any potential worry? Are you?
I'm not worried. I sleep very well. I'm not worried at all. We do everything in good heart. We verify things. If something is going to be wrong, we're going to remove it immediately. We're very responsible, so I don't think we have anything to worry about. You know, the internet is full of forums publishing users' content, so in this aspect, we're not different from any other users-generated website, so that's not scaring me.
I don't want to be the only one asking her questions, so, okay, I see a lot of hands up. Can we, it's yours now, not mine. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, and please
I think
say who you are.
Got there first. I'll pass it on. Sayhuria. My name is Natalia Antelava. I'm co-founder of Coda Story, which is a media startup. Orit, I have a question. I'm a big fan of Wikipedia, and I've given money regularly to Wikipedia and so on. As a journalist, I still have a really. I've seen some great stories on Wiki Tribune. I still have a really hard time getting my head around the concept and how it works in practice. And maybe could you take us through the editorial process of, like, how does this actually happen? Because from an editor's point of view and from a reporter's point of view, I just can't get my head around of how the workflow works.
So the question is how is it handling today and how InnoVision is going to handle one day. So currently, we have the editor sitting next to you, as you know, Peter Bell, and he's working with our journalists on creating really great content, and our community members are helping us developing the stories and flagging any problems and fixing problems that they find in it.
Kind of the evolution of a story from an idea to a final product, and when does the product become final, and how
when
does
it's approved by our editor. So currently it's by our editors, hired ones. Yes.
So what is, I think, one of the most exciting things that we do, Natalia, is, and it is very related to, I'm Peter Bale and I work with for Orit. One of the most interesting shifts in that we're doing is that our stories almost never finish. They are constantly alive. And so I find that as somebody who's always worked either in instant news at Reuters or certainly a 24-hour news cycle. So our Harvey Weinstein coverage, which was excellent in my view, lasted 4 or 5 months as a single article. And it grew from 500 words to 1,500 words and probably 2,000 words. And every change, the beauty of it is that every change, every edit is trackable, every correction and every fix. So what you're creating is this interesting kind of artifact. That it's not just an article, it's an artifact, and that's where I think one of the really interesting potential relationships with Wikipedia comes in. It does mean, it affects us with Google News, I believe, in that our articles are frequently on a relatively old URL, but you can always find them. But the stories can be some months old. The other thing that we're trying to do is create what amounts to agile journalism. So we use Trello, which is a software development platform. We use that for our story planning. And we use a set of checklists, which I mentioned before, that I based on Atul Gawande's book, the Checklist Manifesto, so that you can get our 25-year-old and 20-year-old journalists producing very, very quickly a story which meets our standards, because the standards are very prescribed. What I haven't done yet, but intend to do before I finish up, is post all of those same checklists out there for the audience to be able to, so they know exactly the process. We also have a very clear set of sources that we are prepared ourselves to follow. The audience can find whichever sources that they wish, but for example, the only sources that the journalists, our staff journalists, do not have to attribute is the BBC, Reuters, and the AP. Everything else has to have the attribution, the description of exactly who it's from and why and where, and also so that you don't confuse an opinion piece with a news piece. But if I can also say, Dan, one of the things that is where the community has proven to be extremely effective, is large. So we did a piece recently, the audience itself, a community group, initiated coverage of the March for Our Lives the other day and covered it from Chicago, Los Angeles, London and New York and Washington reasonably effectively. We learnt a lot from doing that with them. That's the kind of thing where you could see it start to really take off. The most effective contributor so far is a remarkable retired French diplomat who writes 2,000, 3,000, even 5,000 word analyses for us about international affairs. The big thing with him has been to try and suppress his desire to make them into commentary and opinion. And so he's been learning this process because we run absolutely no opinion and no commentary. So I haven't achieved the neutrality objective as such yet. For me, that's an objective. For Jimmy, it's an absolute. But we do not run commentary or opinion. So we do, with the story planning, is a combination of the community, which is very small at the moment, but the planning is absolutely crucial, and all stories are flagged to the audience, both on Slack and on the site, as we're thinking of them.
Here, let's pass the mic and please identify.
Thanks,
yourself.
Peter.
Yes, for both Peter and Orit. I'm John. I'm a journalist from the Philippines. I don't mean to be facetious, but when you win a Pulitzer Prize, when a story of yours wins a Pulitzer Prize, who gets it? No, I mean, how does this concept of the community helping your story put your story together redefine the concept of the byline?
May I answer that as well? Do you want me to answer that, Orit?
Yeah, I want you to answer it.
So in certain cases, so Jimmy is actually actively hostile in some respects to bylines because he feels that they are a signature of ownership that he believes can sometimes put other people off contributing. For me, they are a badge of ownership in the sense that if a journalist starts something with a byline, they'll own the relationship with the community for as long as that article is live. And also every person who contributes to that has their picture and initials associated with that story. We won the Pulitzer when I was at the ICIJ for the Panama Papers, and that was a pretty collective project. So, it would be wonderful to win a collective project driven by the 8,000 or 12,000 current Wiki Tribune community.
So if I'm
Let's pass the mic to...
just very quickly, so if I'm a reporter writing for you, I continue to be responsible for the story that I've written for you, right? I continue to have that relationship. But then if I've written, I couldn't possibly do that for all the stories that I've written throughout my career. Like, how does it, this is why I asked the workflow, and like, how does it work? Does it come to that?
Yeah, so the journalists are responsible for everything they've created over time and in history, and for stimulating and maintaining the community relationship within that. That's given the current level of staffing. An area where we badly need to invest is in more community management, but essentially the journalists own the story and the conversation and the contributions. But it is just not contradictory, but it is a major difference publishing in the UK from publishing in the US about what the First Amendment and the US Communications Act allows. So we do have to put everything that is published goes through an editor, but you can see the drafts, which for me is quite terrifying because anything could be there, but it is very clearly labeled as draft. So what we're trying to do is make a distinction, which will be very interesting to see one day if we get sued, but we're trying to make a theoretical distinction between draft and published.
This is one of the interesting parts about this is that the metaphor of watching sausage being made is not a particularly fun one, and watching journalism being made is not always all that exciting either, but this very remarkable transparency is intriguing to me. But I noticed there is a lot of confusion about how the thing works. You're up.
Courtney Raj, Committee to Protect Journalists. 2 questions. First, could you talk about where are your journalists and what are they reporting? Because so far, everything you mentioned is kind of Western, US, UK based, and it seems to me one of the big challenges of the news industry these days is to cover areas that aren't already saturated with news, especially in places that do very little local news and a lot of national, main political news, but there are news deserts. And then second of all, what sort of training are you providing to your journalists? What is your responsibility to people who are reporting? And can the community...
Are you asking about our journalists or community members?
Your journalists, so what sort of...
They are professional journalists.
Okay, but that you don't, I mean, in most countries that are democracies, they're not required to be licensed as journalists. So a best practice is not to require licensing of journalists. So you may be a professional journalist, but we still recommend, for example, that professional journalists get, first aid training, know how to, do certain things, especially if you're looking at reporting in conflict zones or protests, such as the march. So if you could talk a little bit about that, and then also, what do you see as your responsibility towards the community, and can the community contribute primary source? So say there's an article and they want to interview some other expert for the analysis piece that the French guy wrote. What happens if they get into trouble? Where's the responsibility as a publisher?
Let's get
I'll
the
let
mic over
Peter.
to this side. So
If I could answer, you all right for me to answer that, Orit?
Please do.
So the last question first. Yes, the community is entitled and prepared and happy to go and interview people. I will occasionally write a covering email or be CC'd on an email that's a request to an interviewee, so that they know that there is somebody in the organization who vaguely is aware that they're being interviewed. I think there are some issues with community members doing it. There was one the other day who was photographing school students outside their school with protest signs, and I was thinking, oh God, that could go very ugly. So this is why, because I'm old, essentially the journalists get a lot of my experience downloaded to them, and I've codified a tremendous amount of my own experience and knowledge into documents that are held by all of those journalists as a set of core documents that they're expected to follow. But if you look at our FAQs and our help on the site, it's also incredibly detailed about, and I built this in part because of the Trust Project, because the things like our diversity statement is there, our sourcing statement, what we're trying to do, it's all very, very explicit and very open. So
But if they get arrested, are you going to pay their legal fees?
Who? The staff? Yes.
What about the freelancers who are out, say, they're going to cover the protest in Washington and they get arrested?
I think that's a really interesting question for Jimmy and Orit, actually. But
Yes,
that
we
is
are
no, that
gonna
is
support them in that
Yeah.
case, but I don't think they should be arrested. Why would they be arrested
for taking photographs of kids outside their own schools.
If it's legitimate, yes, we're gonna have a crowdfunding. We're gonna help them, of course.
and that's a question that
very theoretical,
every
but
organization faces, whether they're Andy.
Yeah, I actually want to talk about something else in a second, but just to respond to that, it isn't very theoretical, because if you go back to the protest that happened in St. Louis just 5-6 months ago, after a police
Yeah.
officer was found not guilty of murdering a local resident, a number of journalists and observers from the ACLU were all arrested and thrown in jail overnight. And for the citizen journalists who got arrested that night, there was no one to help them, so they had to turn to a local legal aid society to bail them out. Granted, it was an unusual situation, but it's something we're seeing happening.
We definitely gonna
more.
support them. In Jimmy Wales Foundation, we support and campaign for general bloggers and
It's just
social media
important to
users
have the
that get persecuted for
contingency
speaking out. So
plan.
obviously, we're gonna take care of
Yeah.
our community
To go
if
to-
they're sent by us to do anything.
The main question I wanted to ask, I'm Andy Carvin, by the way.
Hi.
It goes back to what you guys were talking about a little while ago about the similarities and differences with Wikipedia. One of my favorite things about Wikipedia, going all the way back to the early days, is watching when a major breaking news story happens, seeing people flock to it and negotiate with each other to figure out how to cover that story in a new Wikipedia entry and the discussion that goes along with it. It's almost down to a science at this point. For like large international news stories. Do you have anything built into your system yet that would allow you to leverage the work that's already taking place in Wikipedia to cover these big breaking news stories? And if not, do you have any concerns that you might be duplicating efforts?
That's a really good question. We don't have anything embedded right now to take, references from Wikipedia to us. We hopefully going to build our own community. You know, it took many years to Wikipedia to develop the way it is today and to be as efficient as it is today in editing and improving entries in a timely manner very quickly in a reliable way. So it is going to take us a few years to get to that point. I think that there might be some overlapping in certain situation, but there are a lot of stories, as I mentioned earlier, that there are going to be news stories but not going to be suitable for Wikipedia to cover. And the coverage is also going to be a little bit different, although we are very inclined to have our articles more of a Wikipedia page in a way that it's going to be facts and less of a story, journalistic story. But it's a good point. Maybe we should explore ways of collaborating. Thank you. I'll think about it.
I'm a freelancer, student, and also a volunteer here at the festival. And I actually want to go back to something that my colleague from the Committee to Protect Journalists brought up, which is thinking about the type of community that you have and then how that reflects in stories, because Jimmy had just mentioned in an interview with Newman Lab that still the majority of your readers are male and from California, which is like a pretty specific audience, and still only 20% of your readers are women. And so I wonder, you know, can you really say that you're fixing the news if the community is such a major part of actually setting this news agenda, and yet it seems to only be reflecting the interests and perhaps serving the interests as well of a very small demographic. So I guess the questions off that are, can you talk a little bit more about the demographics of your audience as well as perhaps the contributor community population, and then also like how important to you is it to you to actually diversify this? I mean, if you're making money off of it, if it's working, you know, is it important, you know, to diversify for you? I mean, so those are the two questions.
First of all, it's very important, as you saw in my presentation, and I said that it's personally it's very important for me, especially the gender part of it. It's very too early to speak about percentage because our community is so small at the moment. We don't have thousands of, you know, of community members, so we can actually get percentage of things. The first people, you know, coming are majority of men, and on our first meetup we had, I think, 30 men and one woman, so we definitely need to fix that. I have no interest in having only one woman on every 20 men, and I certainly don't want it to be UK or US focused at all. That's not our vision. We started by hiring journalists in London because we are based in London, but in our vision, we're gonna ask our supporters to, our subscribers, for instance, if you are willing to have an extra £3 a month, for instance, so we can hire journalists in Africa or in the Philippines or in different areas. We can't start globally because we don't have the resources to do that, but definitely that's one of our core efforts, to have our community as diverse as possible. And we want to have community members and journalists from different walks of life, different backgrounds. It's crucial for our vision, because having another, you know, duplicating the current newsrooms, it's definitely not something we want to do. We have to start from somewhere, though. We publicly launched our website only in late October, so that's not long enough to have it as diverse as we want. The platform is still not fully developed as we want it. It's not fully wiki. We have so much work to do. So I completely agree with you. It's so important for me, and it's crucial part, and it's what you mentioned in the comment. No, we're not going to be satisfied if it's just going to work. No, it's not, because that's not changing anything. If we see that it's not working, we're just going to close everything. It's not worth it. We want to be different. We want to provide something else. We want, you know, there were ideas, people saying maybe you should translate to different languages. No, I don't want to translate those main stories to different cultures. I want to bring, you know, journalists from France and from Latin America and from Germany and from the Philippines and from Africa covering their own stories. And if we want to bring it to the, you know, mainstream audience, we want to translate it to English. We don't want it to go the other way around. And Our main struggle beyond that diversity, that's we're definitely going to work, and we're going to launch in more languages. As Jimmy said, we want to launch in as many languages, in as many regions as soon as possible. So we are going to do that very, very soon. Particularly about the gender part, that's an issue that Wikipedia has been struggling with for a long time. For some reason, the structure, or I'm not sure exactly what, why, it attracts more male geeks than women. So Wikipedia, the way Wikimedia is, the body behind Wikipedia, they're working on having workshops directed to women, to encourage more women participation and so on. It's been proven to work, but not, as expected. So we are going to work on increasing that particularly. We're going to do our A/B testing. We're going to try to find different strategic ways to improve that. So we were not satisfied by the current, situation, but yeah.
Let me ask, when can you give some rough time in the future when she can look back and make a decision on whether you have made progress, real serious progress in this issue? So when should she check back to find out if this is actually happening?
She shouldn't check, she should be part of our community. Exactly, I can't give up a woman. That's again a part of the Wiki spirit. We don't want people to check to see how we progress. We want them to be part of our community. We want them to help us make better. Wikipedia was born and raised and improved by people contributing whatever they can contribute to it. So I know that not everyone is able to. You're a journalist, so you definitely can add to the content. But a lot of people tell me that they don't, that they're very enthusiastic about the idea, but they don't really know how to start stories. They don't really know how to improve. And some people, it's easier for them to just subscribe, just to support the idea. Even just morally support is great. There are different ways to contribute, and hopefully we're going to provide a good enough and diverse enough product for you and for everyone, and that's
Consider yourself recruited, okay? We had
definitely.
We had a question in the back, and then we'll come to you. He's been waiting for a while.
Okay.
So you're next.
I'll ask quickly. Elon Greenberg from Coda Story as well.
Hi.
Hi. So in the dashboard you had of values, you talked about neutrality as I think the paramount one, or at least you highlighted it. And the way you described it kind of concerns me, because it sounded like you were describing it not aspirationally, but as something that Wiki Tribune can actually attain through its community and through its process. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes and no. I suspect what you're thinking, that you can't be completely neutral, right?
Right,
so
but and also it especially concerns me because it suggests...
Don't be concerned, first of all.
Okay, but I'm going to flag it because it highlights, it reflects an essential difference between an encyclopedia, Wikipedia, and a newspaper, or Wiki Tribune, right? I mean, one is an assembly of facts and does arrive at sort of something objective and true, and the other is essentially an interpretation, and as deeply reported as it is, never arrives, and shouldn't claim to arrive at an objective fact.
Why is it an interpretation? Why should news be an interpretation of the truth instead of delivering the truth?
Because it's observed, and reporting is always flawed in some way, and I just think it's significant to suggest, to have something not as an ideal, but to suggest that you accomplish it, suggests to me, it does concern me, actually. I'll let her answer.
Okay, I'm not sure what the question in there was, but can you respond?
Is it an ideal, or are you claiming you're going to arrive at an objective truth in Wiki Tribune?
So my background, as I said, I'm a lawyer. I studied law, but I also studied journalism and communication on my bachelor. And the one thing I learned was that there isn't such a thing as complete neutrality. you can't tell a story and be completely neutral. It's just impossible, because everything you do when you tell a story is biased. The language that you choose, the terminology, your own, background. We are all blind to our own biases. And I think that's why our platform is fixing it. So wait, I do agree with you that even if we have 20,000 people going through the articles, you can't really have it as a complete, even Wikipedia is not completely unbiased, but it's striving to, and that's our point. The fact that you can't really achieve 100% neutrality doesn't mean that we don't need to try to get there. There was a campaign against to decline the number of people being hurt on this car accident to 0, and the manager of the campaign was asked, do you really think you can get to 0, people injured in car accidents? And he was like, what is the number you would want me to say? Let's decrease it to 10, to 100, what is the number? So even though you probably can't get to 100%, you should still strive for it. It doesn't mean you need to let go. We should get as close to neutrality as we can. So again, in my vision, and we're not there yet, but we're taking the steps towards, in my vision, it's gonna be much drier stories than you currently see in news media. And, you're used to read interpreted news and having it telling you an interesting story. If you go to Wikipedia, you just get the facts. So I do want Wiki Tribune to be as factual as possible, because I don't want that. Currently, when I see the news, I feel like they're feeding me what to think. I don't want to read a news story to know what's going on. I want to know what's going on in the world. I don't want them to tell me what to think. I want them to give me the information and let me decide on my own. But I want reliable information. So our stories are going to be very dry, maybe. One day. But I think there is a need for that. For dry news, just give me the facts and I'll decide for myself. And the drier it is, the more neutral it is, the more people going through it and clearing away all the biases, then again, it is going to be biased to some degree, but it's going to be less biased than other news publications.
She has a question.
I think it's going to be the last one.
Yeah, we're running out of time.
We ran out of time.
Okay.
So last question.
She was
kind of
waiting.
tapped on that. We kind of tapped on that already anyway, but you mentioned that you were working together with NGOs at the moment to make it local.
Yes.
Which NGOs are that? Like, where are you thinking about going local? And how many journalists are working for Wiki Tribune at the moment? And maybe also how many
So that's a different
readers do you
question.
have? Yeah.
Okay. I was confused for a second.
Sorry, no, different question.
As Peter mentioned, we have around a dozen journalists, and we have editors covering stories from all around the world for 24 hours coverage, and they're doing a great job. Regarding the localization, so I can't, it's jinxing it if I'm talking about specific projects if they're not going to be executed, but we are in contact with the Knights Foundation. They have a list of few cities in the US for covering, but I'm also in contact with a few in the UK. And again, why UK, US? It's because that's, Jimmy is from the US and we are based in UK, so it's just easier. But again, after we're more established, we'll be able to expand it to more, to further, projects in localizing in other continents. So currently, for a question, it's mostly, we're looking for the first city to make the pilot. It will probably be in the US, though. And again, it's easier for us because it's English, but yeah.
Well, I think we have about 1 million more questions, but zero time. So
you have my email. You had my email address, so you can contact me.
Thank you so much for
Thank you, Dan.
having us.
Thank you.